Hello, everybody. We are a Butler student group from the biology department, and we're going to be talking about water. My name is Vic, and the other members of this group are James, Harrison, Emma, and Alyssa. So let's get started.
All right, so hi guys, my name is Emma. So obviously water is all around us. It makes up 70% of the Earth's surface. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with water. So before we get into the science, I just kind of wanted to show you and remind you all the fun things that you can do. Obviously, like snorkeling and stuff with boats and kayaking and canoeing, pretty self-explanatory. I actually am a swimmer here at Butler, so I use water every single day. And then, of course, skiing and snowboarding is just frozen water. So there's a lot of stuff you can do.
All right, I'm going to talk about cooking with water. So I am a really big fan of mac and cheese and spaghetti. But to make mac and cheese and spaghetti, you have to be able to boil the water first, which requires a temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is actually super hot. And you would never want to put your hand near the stove or in the water because it would burn you pretty bad. But water is very important for our food. And then on the flip side, you can also freeze water to make popsicles, which I'm a big fan of. And popsicles have a lot of water in them. So it freezes when you put it in a cold place. So like your freezer or sometimes the snow will be cold enough. So yeah, water is very important for what we can use it to cook with.
Water is also extremely important to how the body functions. And so water is actually considered an essential nutrient to the human body. And about 60% to 70% of adult bodies are comprised of water. So in the image on the right, you can see that the brain itself is made up of nearly 75% water. The blood is made up of 83% water. And even your bones that are hard and you wouldn't think have water in them are made up of about 22% water. And water is so important that humans can survive about 2 to 3 weeks without eating any food based off of how much fat you have on your body. But regardless of how much fat you have, you can only survive about 2 to 3 days without water.
Okay, so water is incredibly important for understanding ecosystems and how they function in plants. So specifically with ecosystems, we can classify ecosystems pretty often based on how much water they're receiving. There is, of course, other things that contribute to how you classify an ecosystem, such as sunlight and average temperatures. But water is something that is very important because it kind of dictates what types of plants and what types of animals can live there. And it also impacts typically how humans are going to live around a certain area. So in a desert, not a lot of humans are going to live there because it's very difficult to survive there. So yeah, for that reason, water is very important to ecosystems. And then water is also very important to plants because essentially water is what is going to be the medium for what transports nutrients through their veins. And on top of that, water keeps plant cells turgid, and you can also think of this as swollen or firm, because if you look at a plant that's wilted because it hasn't gotten enough water, it looks kind of saggy and kind of sad. That's basically because it hasn't had enough water and the cells have kind of shrunk. And then on top of that, many different types of plants are going to look very different based on how much water they receive. So if you were to look at something like a cactus or a succulent, those are going to be larger, fluffier, more voluminous sized cells and plants. And they're going to have a very waxy cuticle or outer tissue. And that is to help the plant retain water, rather than if you were to look at say a plant that is in a warmer environment, it might have thinner leaves, and that's because water isn't an issue, and so it doesn't have to adapt any sort of mechanism that's going to allow it to retain water. So moving on, transpiration is something that my friend James is going to talk about with surface tension and cohesion. But just really quickly, transpiration is very important for plants because essentially that is what is going to drive the plant's ability to disperse nutrients across its body. And James is going to get into it, but it essentially is caused by evaporation on the surface of a leaf, and that pulls water all the way down from the roots all the way through, and then that helps facilitate the movement of nutrients. But we're going to get back into that very soon.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about a property of water called density. So density is basically described as how tightly packed matter is within a substance. So as you can see on the image on the right, it compares the densities of a gas, a liquid, and a solid. And the smiley faces just represent particles or matter. So the gas has only a few particles in it, which makes it have a really low density because the particles are free to move about within the substance. They can bounce off each other and bounce off the walls of the container. And then in the liquid in the middle, the particles are packed more tightly together than the gas, but they still have room to move and shift. So it's a little bit more dense than the gas, but still less dense than the solid. And then in the solid on the far right, the particles are packed extremely close together. So this makes the solid really dense because the particles can't move about and they're just stuck where they're at. And then on the image on the left, you can see that density will also affect how objects interact in other substances, such as water. So less dense objects will float when placed in more dense objects. So in the image, you can see the cork on the far left is much less dense than the water because only a very small amount of the cork is submerged under the water surface. Then in the middle image, the block of wood is a little more dense than the cork, but still less dense than the water because there is more of it sank under the water surface than the cork, but it's still not sinking. And then the block of metal on the far right is much more dense than the water because it's completely submerged and has sunk to the bottom.
So I'll be talking about the properties of water, which are adhesion and cohesion. As you can see from the picture there, we have two water molecules. Cohesion is water molecules sticking together. They're very sticky, they like to stick together, and also to similar substances. So we have the two water molecules sticking together and to objects on the side. We can see this in a variety of places. One of them is transpiration, like Vic was saying earlier. The water actually pulls itself up through the plant from the roots out through the leaves, and it's connected to itself and the sides of the inside of the plant. You can also see it here in the little beaker. The water will stick to itself on the surface, having surface tension, but also it'll stick to the sides and actually climb on called a curve, and I'll be showing you that in an experiment later on.
So I'm going to talk about surface tension, and this kind of goes along well with what James was just presenting, because as you can see in the pictures that are white on the left side, all of those interactions with the molecules are within the water, and there's really no arrows that are in the environment surrounding it because the water really likes to be attracted to itself and kind of stuck together. So you can see in the top left, water can make like a little droplet because of the way that all the yellow arrows are pulling into each other because the water wants to be as close as possible and take up as less area as possible. And then you can see in the bottom picture on the left that the water can form like a bubble because all of the arrows won't go out into the environment, but they'll stay within the water. So that's why these little bugs can walk on the surface of the water. And that's why the water comes out of the sink in little droplets. And then the picture in the top right is a penny that kind of looks like the picture in the bottom, but we're going to be doing an experiment with that penny in a little bit.
So the property of water that I'm going to kind of talk about in my experiment is solubility. So essentially, from the picture on the left, you can see that there's a solid substance that they put in water, and over time, that solid is going to kind of dissolve into the water. And so water's property of being super polar, or kind of what everybody else has said, just having those different molecules, is going to help facilitate its ability to kind of take things that like water and take it with them. So an example of this is sort of like a bath bomb. So when you put those in water, all of those, it kind of breaks up and dissolves within the water. But then on the contrary, oil does not like to mix with water, so it is not soluble.
So we're just going to go ahead and show you a video that we made for everybody. I'm going to make sure to restart this. But yeah, this is a video that we made to tell you a little bit more about water and show you a couple experiments.
Hey guys, we're a Butler student group here today to talk to you about wonderful water. We have a couple different water properties that we're going to talk to you about. Mine is surface tension.
I'll be talking about adhesion and cohesion.
I'll be talking about polarity.
I'll be teaching you about density.
And I'll be talking about solubility.
Hi, my name is Vic, and I'm going to be describing the properties of water and polarity. So, water is one of the most important substances on the planet, especially for living things. Now the question is, what is water and how does it behave? So water is made out of these things called elements. So I'm going to describe the structure to you. It is 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Now, it isn't entirely important that you understand the names of these elements, but it is more important to understand how these elements make up water and how that makes water behave. The strength that oxygen has is because it is very negatively charged, as opposed to hydrogen, which is a small positively charged molecule. So that is why oxygen is big and strong and pulls hydrogen in. So water is polar, or it has polarity, which essentially means that one of these elements is larger and stronger than the other one, and so it pulls the smaller elements in. And so the way you can think of this is, think of a very large and big strong muscular wrestler playing tug of war with 2 babies. So think of the word polar. Does it remind you of something? Because when I think of the word polar, I think of the North and the South Pole. The North and the South Pole are on opposite ends of the planet. And similarly, water behaves just like that. There is a positive end and a negative end on opposite sides of the molecule. Now to demonstrate this, I'm going to show you an experiment. So, if you're anything like me, over quarantine, you watch Avatar, The Last Airbender. And me personally, I've always wanted to be a waterbender, so I'm going to show you how to do that. First, we're going to rub this balloon on our hair, because there's a lot of negatively charged particles in our hair. And so the balloon's going to collect those, it's going to interact with the positive charge in the water, and we should be able to get this stream of water to bend.
Hi everyone, my name is Harrison. I'm a senior at Butler, and I also hope one day to be a doctor, and I am from Southern Illinois. I'm here to talk to you today about density, which is defined as the amount of matter that takes up a given amount of space, or in simpler terms, how much space an object takes up. And it's calculated by dividing mass by volume. Now, water actually has really unique density, and there's a lot of aspects about water's density that makes it different than other substances or other liquids. One unique aspect of water's density is that salt water is much more dense than fresh water. This is why if you've ever swam in an ocean and in fresh water, you probably noticed that you floated and swam much easier in the ocean salt water than you did in a fresh pond or lake. So now I have a little experiment just to show this. So in this cup, I have fresh water, and in this cup that looks very cloudy has a lot of salt in it. So this egg I'm gonna put into the fresh water, and you see that it sinks right to the bottom. This egg I'm going to place in the salt water, and then you can see that it floats in the middle of the cup. Have you ever heard of an oil spill? Well, they're really bad and they can be really dangerous to wildlife. But one reason why they can be fixed is because of water's density. Oil is actually less dense than water, which causes it to float on top of the water. So oil and water will not mix together, making it possible for the oil to be separated from the water and cleaned up. So now I have a quick experiment just to show that. I'm going to pour this blue water into the cup, and and then pour this oil on top of it, and you'll be able to see that the oil and water will not mix, and the oil floats to the top. The oil is the yellow liquid with all the red dots in it.
Hello, I'll be talking about water's properties of adhesion and cohesion. Adhesion is the property of sticking to other things, like water. And cohesion is the ability of water to stick to itself. Basically, water is a very sticky molecule. So I have a couple demonstrations here. We're going to start with the beaker and pour some water into the graduated cylinder. If you look at the water, there's a slight curve to it. This is called the meniscus. What's happening is the water is sticking to both sides of the graduated cylinder and itself to form a crescent. Okay, now we're going to do a second experiment where I'm going to put this paper towel into the cup of water, and you're going to see the water travel up the paper. This shows both its property of sticking to itself and sticking to other things. So you can see the water's climbing up the paper, it's sticking to the paper, and it's pulling itself up because it's also sticking to itself. So the properties of adhesion and cohesion have some pretty cool implications in the plant life. So like I showed here, water can travel up different substances like paper. It also is attracted to itself. So in a plant, what happens when water evaporates off the leaves is water pulls itself up through the plant to fill the spot of the water that was taken in evaporation. And those are the properties of adhesion and cohesion.
Hi guys, my name is Alyssa Ritter and I'm a student at Butler, and I am studying to be a doctor someday in hopefully the near future. And I'm excited to be here today to tell you about a water property called surface tension. So have you ever seen one of those bugs with the long legs floating on top of the water, kind of looking like it's pushing down a little bit but still on top? Or have you seen water drip out of a faucet and kind of look like a little bubble as it drips down? Well, those are properties of surface tension, so we're going to talk about that today. Surface tension relies on water's forces. Water has molecules of hydrogen and oxygen, which interact with each other, and they like to be attracted to each other, which is why it kind of looks like water forms a bubble, because they don't want to fall apart, and they like to stay as close as they can to each other, so they take up as little space as possible. So water behaves like a thin, stretchy film on its top layer, which is why those bugs look like they're pressing into the water but not actually falling through, and it looks like they can kind of walk on water. So we're going to do an experiment to see how many drops of water we can get to form a bubble on top of a penny before it bursts. Alright, so I have a single penny right on this plate, and I'm going to see how many drops of water I can get on top of it. Okay, so for those of you following along, there's 34 drops of water on that penny. So that just shows how as each drop adds in, the water kind of pulls it together. It doesn't want to let it go and burst until it absolutely can't have any more bonds and attractions within the water. So it's a pretty cool experiment to show what surface tension is. Hi guys, my name is Emma Harris. I am a student at Butler as well. And I'm from Michigan, so we're surrounded by the Great Lakes. So when we're talking about water, I've been surrounded by water my whole life. So my experiment that I'm going to show you guys today has to do with the ability for different solutions to be able to dissolve in water. So everyone knows what M&Ms are. It's a delicious candy. It's almost Halloween season. And so a really cool thing about M&Ms is actually that the color of M&Ms, that dye, is actually able to dissolve in water. And what that means is that it can latch onto the water molecules and kind of go hang out with them. But the M itself on the M&Ms does not do that. And so I'm going to show you sort of what happens when you put an M&M inside of water.
Okay, so those were the properties of water. So is there any questions that anybody has out there? We reserved some time for any questions.
Oh my gosh. Can you talk about what is the like freezing and boiling temperature of water?
The boiling point was 100 degrees Celsius and 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the freezing point was 32 degrees